The question we stopped asking, a story of distant courage and the love that survives honesty. The most dangerous silence in a marriage is not the one after a fight. It is the one that grows so slowly, so quietly, that neither person notices it has filled every room. Part 1. The distance with no name. Clara Voss had been carrying something inside her for almost 2 years before she found the words for it. It wasn't grief exactly, it wasn't anger or resentment or the particular sharpness of feeling wronged. It was more like the sensation of reaching for something in the dark and finding the familiar object slightly, not where it was supposed to be, not gone, just displaced just enough to make your hand close on air instead of the thing you needed. She felt it in the mornings when she and her husband moved around their kitchen, in practice parallel two people who had memorized each other's movements so completely that they no longer needed to look. She felt it in the evenings when they sat on opposite ends of the couch, each holding something, a book, a phone, a cup of tea, and the silence between them was comfortable and warm and entirely, utterly empty of the thing she was looking for. She felt it most acutely at 3 a.m, lying in the dark beside a man she had loved for 14 years, listening to his breathing, and understanding with a clarity that daylight would soften, but never fully dissolve, that she could not remember the last time he had looked at her, as if she were surprising. His name was Marcus Voss. He was 43 years old, a structural engineer, with a firm in Seattle, the kind of man who was quietly excellent at everything he did, and who had never once needed to be the loudest person in a room because his competence spoke for him without announcement. He was kind, he was dependable. He was the kind of husband who remembered her coffee order without being asked, and noticed when she was tired before she said so, and fixed things that were broken without making the fixing a production. In 14 years, he had never once been cruel to her. He had also, in the last 3 or 4 years, never once been unpredictable. Clara was 41. She ran the community arts program for the city of Seattle, a position she had built from a part-time administrative role into something that touched thousands of people each year, that brought music and visual art and theatre into schools and community centres and hospital waiting rooms. She was good at it in the specific way that people are good at things that align with who they actually are. She was also increasingly aware that her professional life required her to be curious and responsive and alive to possibility in a way that her personal life had quietly stopped asking of her. She wanted to be fair in this account, fair to both of them, because fairness is the only thing that makes an honest story worth telling. She and Marcus had been happy. Not performed happy, not maintaining the appearance of happy, but genuinely happy in the way that two people who are well-matched and well-intentioned and have built a life together are happy, which is a specific and real kind of happiness that should not be underestimated. The early years had been full of the particular electricity of two people discovering each other, and finding that the discovery kept being rewarding new rooms in the same person, new reasons to feel that you had made the right choice. They had argued and reconciled and travelled and planted the garden and supported each other through professional difficulties and personal losses. Clara's father had died when she was 34, and Marcus had been in those months exactly the kind of presence she needed, steady, without being rigid, available, without being overwhelming. There, in the way that the people we are most grateful for are there. She had known, holding his hand at her father's funeral, that she had married the right person. She still knew that. That was the thing. The knowledge had not gone anywhere. What had gone was the feeling that the knowledge produced when it was fresh, the particular warmth of being with someone who sees you, the electricity of being interesting to someone whose intelligence you respect, the sense that the shared life is still being discovered rather than maintained. Those things had not been replaced by something bad. They had been replaced by something good. Comfort, familiarity, the quiet ease of two people who know each other well enough not to need to explain themselves. And she had for a long time told herself that the trade was worth it, that this was what long love looked like, that the early electricity was never meant to be permanent, and its absence was not loss but maturity. She still believed some of that, but she had begun in the months before the October evening to suspect that she had used the true parts of that belief to cover over a part that was not true, the part that said the quiet ease and the sense of being seen cannot coexist, that you have to choose between the comfortable known and the interesting unknown. And you chose the comfortable known, and that is the life you have. She did not believe that anymore. She was beginning to believe that the comfortable known could also be interesting and alive if both people were paying attention. She just had not yet found a way to say so. They lived in a converted craftsman in the Finney Ridge neighbourhood, a house they had spent 4 years renovating. The house was beautiful. Marcus had designed the structural modifications himself, and Clara had chosen every tile and fixture and paint colour with the same attention she brought to her professional work. The house was in many ways the best version of what they had built together, all the care and the shared vision, and the willingness to work at something difficult, visible in every room. She loved the house with a completeness that was also, when she thought about it clearly, a little heartbreaking. Because she loved it the way you love a record of something that was not a promise of something still becoming. They had a daughter, Simone, 12 years old, in the 7th grade at a school 3 blocks from their house. Simone had Marcus's precision and Clara's instinct for beauty and a specific quality of attention that belonged entirely to herself, a way of sitting inside a moment that Clara had been watching in wonder since Simone was old enough to sit. The daughter was not peripheral to this story. She was in the way children always are in the stories of their parents' marriages, central to everything. This is the life that had been built carefully and with genuine love, and was now sitting very still in the way that beautiful things sit still when they are waiting for something to either restore them or break them open. The evening it began to change was a Tuesday in October, which is when Seattle does its most honest weather, not the dramatic storms that make good photographs, but the steady, unglamorous rain that falls for days without pause, the kind that reminds you that the city has always been built for people who are comfortable with persistence. Clara came home from a fundraising event at 7:30 to find Marcus at the kitchen counter going through the mail, Simone at the dining table doing homework, the dinner dishes already washed and drying. She kissed Simone on the top of her head, hung her coat, poured herself a glass of water, and stood in her kitchen and felt with a sudden and unexpected specificity that she was standing in a room she had walked into 10,000 times, and tonight it felt like a museum of a life, rather than the life itself. She said nothing about it that evening. She helped Simone finish a math problem, talked to Marcus about a contract to issue on a project he was managing, watched 20 minutes of television, and went to bed. Marcus came to bed an hour later. She heard him come in, felt the slight shift in the mattress, heard his breathing slow toward sleep. She lay awake for 2 hours staring at the ceiling, holding the thing she had been carrying and finally giving it its name. She was lonely, not in the way of someone who had been abandoned, in the way of someone who was surrounded by the evidence of love and could not feel the warmth of it. Part 2, what happened in June. I need to tell you something about the year before the October evening, because the October evening did not arrive without context. In June, Marcus had a work project that required him to be in San Francisco for 3 weeks. Not unusual, the firm took on projects up and down the coast, and Marcus was the lead structural engineer on a significant mixed-use development that was entering a critical phase. Clara understood this. She had always understood the demands of his work the way he had always understood the demands of hers. With the specific generosity of 2 people who had over 14 years built a life that accommodated the reality that both of them had work that mattered. She had driven him to the airport on a Sunday morning in early June. They had been easy together that morning, coffee in the car, a conversation about Simone's upcoming camp schedule, a brief discussion about a structural question he was thinking through on the drive. She had kissed him at the departure terminal, told him to call when he landed, and driven home through the Sunday morning city that was still waking up. She had spent that Sunday doing the things she did when Marcus was travelling, reorganising the pantry, which she never did when he was home because it required a level of focus she reserved for solitude, reading 2 chapters of a book she'd been struggling to find time for, making a simple dinner just for herself and Simone, that neither of them would have chosen if Marcus were there, something with a lot of spice that he found overwhelming. It had been, she realised afterward, a perfectly fine Sunday, which was itself a piece of information she had not been ready to examine. Marcus called that evening as promised. He was in his hotel room, tired from the travel, already thinking about the project kick-off the following morning. They talked for 20 minutes. It was a warm conversation, easy. The kind they had gotten very good at over 14 years of building a shared life. A conversation that covered all the relevant information and left both of them feeling appropriately in contact with each other. After she hung up, Clara had sat with the phone in her hand for a moment, aware that something in her was not quite satisfied by the warmth of it, and had not known what to do with that awareness, and had set it aside in the category of things she was too tired to examine tonight. He called every evening from San Francisco. The calls were consistent and warm, and continued to leave her with that faint, unexamined quality of something she did not know how to name. What she did not know, and would not know until September, was that, In those 3 weeks, Marcus was spending his evenings differently from the evenings she was imagining for him, hotel room service. Early to bed, he was spending many of them across a table from a woman named Rebecca Shaw talking. What she also did not know, because she was thinking about the pantry and the spicy dinner and the pleasantly solitary Sundays, was that the quality in her that was not satisfied by the warmth of his calls had a name, and the name was, "I need more than warmth, I need to be known," and that the fact of this need unspoken and unexamined was part of what had been quietly building in the house for 2 years. She would understand all of this in September when Marcus came home on a Thursday evening from a late meeting, sat down at the kitchen table and told her what he told her in the very careful voice of a man who has been rehearsing something for weeks and still is not sure he has found the right words. Was this in San Francisco he had spent a great deal of time with Rebecca Shaw. He had found those conversations easier than conversations had felt to him in some time. Not because Rebecca was extraordinary, she was smart and interesting, but not more so than Clara, but because he had come to those conversations with nothing invested in them. No history, no assumption, no role to maintain. He had been simply present without the accumulated weight of being Marcus to someone who had known Marcus for 14 years, and in that simplicity of presence, he had talked about things he had stopped talking about at home, his uncertainties, his fears, his questions about the direction of his work and the directions of his life. He had talked about things he had not known he was not talking about, which was its own revelation. He told her that on the second to last evening they had been at dinner after a very long day, both of them tired, and the conversation had reached a depth that made the next step visible and available, and entirely wrong. He told her he had not taken the next step, that he had excused himself from the table, walked around the block in the San Francisco evening, understood with a clarity that was almost physical what he was doing and what it would cost, and gone back inside and finished dinner and said good night and gone to his hotel and lain awake until 3 a.m, thinking about how he had arrived at a table in San Francisco, wanting something he had the means to have at home, but had stopped knowing how to find. He told her all of this at the kitchen table in September. He told her because the alternative was not telling her, and not telling her meant beginning to lie. And beginning to lie meant becoming someone he did not want to be. And the someone he did not want to be was not compatible with the marriage he still wanted. Clara listened to all of it. She kept her hands flat on the table. She did not cry, and she did not interrupt, and she did not ask the questions she would ask later separately, in the privacy of her own mind. How long did you sit in that restaurant? What did you feel? Did you want to? She sat with what he had said for a long moment, and then she said very quietly, why did it almost happen? He didn't have a clean answer. He said he didn't know. He said he had thought about it for 3 months, and the most honest answer he could give was that somewhere in the conversation he had felt like a person who was being seen in a way he hadn't been seen for a while. He said he knew that was partly his own failure, that he hadn't asked for that kind of seeing at home, hadn't opened the doors that would have made it possible. He said he was telling her, because the alternative was not telling her, and the not telling was already changing who he was in ways he found unacceptable. Clara looked at her husband for a long time after he finished. Then she said, thank you for telling me, and she went upstairs and ran a bath and sat in it for 40 minutes and did not come to any conclusions. She was too careful a person to come to conclusions when she was in shock, and she recognized the state she was in and gave it the respect of not trying to resolve it immediately. That was September. Between September and October, they did not speak directly about what Marcus had told her. They spoke about everything else: Simone's school, the contract to issue a weekend they were considering in Vancouver, the normal furniture of their shared life. What they did not do was speak about the fact that his almost had found its way into the house, and was sitting in the corner of every room, not taking up much space, but never entirely out of sight. What Clara did in those weeks between September and October was pay attention, not in the surveillance mode of a suspicious wife, but in the genuine mode of someone who has been told something important and is trying to understand what it means about the life she has been living. She watched Marcus at dinner, talking to Simone about her homework with the attentiveness that had always been one of his best qualities. She watched him fix the loose hinge on the back door without being asked. She watched him pour her coffee in the mornings with the automatic care that had become over years indistinguishable from habit. And she tried to remember the last time she had asked him a question she didn't already know the answer to. She could not remember, and that told her something about both of them. Part 3, the third person. Her name was Isabel. Clara had known Isabel Reyes for 7 years. They had met through the arts program. Isabel was a graphic designer who had volunteered to develop materials for the program's first major fundraiser, and had stayed involved ever since, serving 2 terms on the advisory board, introducing Clara to donors and community partners, becoming over time someone Clara Boom. They had lunch every few weeks. They texted with the comfortable regularity of women who had crossed the threshold from acquaintance to actual friendship, the kind of friendship where you could say the true thing without significant preamble. In October, 3 weeks after the evening, Clara named her loneliness, and 6 weeks after Marcus's disclosure about San Francisco, Clara had lunch with Isabel at a restaurant on Capitol Hill. They had been there 40 minutes talking about the arts program's upcoming winter gala. When Isabel set down her fork and looked at Clara with the expression of someone who has been waiting for the right moment and has decided this is it. "Can I say something that's not my business?" Isabel asked. Clara looked at her. "Since when has that stopped you?" Isabel didn't smile. "I'm serious." "Then say it. You look like someone who's been carrying something very heavy for a long time," Isabel said, "and I've been watching you not say it for months. I don't know what it is, but I think you should say it to someone." Clara looked at her plate. She had not told anyone about Marcus's disclosure. Not her sister, not her therapist. She had let her therapist's subscription lapse in the summer, meaning to renew it, and not finding the moment, she had carried it in the specific isolation of someone who protects a marriage by keeping its trouble inside it, which is both an act of loyalty and eventually a form of damage. "Marcus almost had an affair," she said. The words came out simpler than she expected. Isabel was quiet for a moment, then, "Almost. He told me himself. He said nothing happened. I believe him." Clara looked up. "But something happened in me when he told me, something I'm still trying to name." "What does it feel like?" Clara thought about it. "Like realizing you've been living in a house with a crack in the foundation that you didn't notice, and now that you've noticed it, you can't stop seeing it, and you have to decide whether to fix it or move out, say." Isabel was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to fix it? Yes?" Clara said immediately, and then, "I don't know if I know how." They sat together for another 2 hours. Isabel, to her credit, did not offer solutions. She asked questions. What had Marcus said? What had Clara felt? What did she understand about how the distance had grown? She listened with the specific quality of a person who believes that the act of being heard is itself a form of help. Before they left, she said one more thing. "Clara, can I say something else that's not my business? Apparently this is who we are now," Clara said. "I've watched you and Marcus for 7 years," Isabel said. "At events at the gala last year, at the thing in March, and I've watched the way he looks at you when you're not paying attention to him." She paused. "He's not a man who stopped loving you. He's a man who got lost. That's different. And it matters." Set. Clara drove home in the October rain, thinking about the difference between getting lost and stopping. Part 4, the question. She chose a Thursday evening. Not strategically, it was simply the evening when Simone was at a sleepover at her friend Petra's house, and the house was quieter than usual, which felt like the right conditions for saying something that had been building for months without enough space to breathe. Marcus came home at 6:30. He made pasta because Thursday was often pasta, the comfortable rhythm of their weekly routine. Clara set the table. They ate. They talked about the contractor issue which had resolved, and about Simone's upcoming school performance, which they both planned to attend. The conversation was warm and easy and completely surface level, and Clara sat inside it and understood that this warm, easy, surface level conversation that both of them were capable of having indefinitely, without ever once disturbing anything real, was the thing that had to change. She waited until they were in the living room. The rain was steady against the windows. Marcus had a book open which he wasn't reading. Clara had a book too, also unread. "Marcus," she said. He looked up immediately. He had always been attentive to the quality of her voice. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she said. "I want to ask you something." She set her book on the coffee table. She was going to do this without the prop of something to hold. "I've been thinking about what you told me in September, about San Francisco, about Rebecca." His expression became careful. "Okay. I'm not bringing it up to revisit it," she said. "I believe what you told me. I believe nothing happened. I believe you told me because you didn't want to not tell me." She looked at him steadily. But I've been sitting with a question for weeks, and I think I need to ask it directly. Ask it all, he said. She took a breath. Why did it feel like being seen? What was she doing that felt like seeing you? Because I've been trying to understand what that means about us, and I think I need to hear it from you. The room was very still. Marcus set down his book. He looked at his hands for a long moment, then at her. That's the hardest question you've ever asked me, he said. I know. He was quiet for a while. When he spoke, his voice had the quality of someone handling something they are afraid of breaking. She asked me what I was afraid of, not in a relationship context. We were talking about the project, about a structural decision I was uncertain about. And she asked what I was afraid of if I got it wrong, and I told her. And then she asked the next question. And I told her that too, and it kept going. He looked at Clara. I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me what I was afraid of, and genuinely wanted to hear the answer. Clara sat with that. When did I stop asking? She said finally. When did I stop offering? He said. They looked at each other across the coffee table, across the rug she had chosen, and the lamp he had installed, and the 14 years of shared life arranged around them. And something shifted in the room, not resolved, not repaired, but opened. The way a window opens when you realise the air inside has been too still for too long. I'm not angry at you, Clara said. I want you to know that. I'm trying to understand, and I want us to understand together, because I think the thing that almost happened in San Francisco is the same thing I've been feeling in this house for 2 years, and it has a name. And the name is that we stopped asking each other the questions that matter. Marcus nodded slowly. I know, he said. I've known since September. I just didn't know how to open it. I didn't either, she said. But here we are. They talked until 1 in the morning. Not about San Francisco, not about Rebecca, not almost about themselves, about the things they had stopped saying. Because they had assumed the other person already knew about the specific way that comfort had become for both of them, a substitute for closeness, without either of them noticing the substitution. Marcus told her he had stopped talking about his work uncertainties, because he had decided she was too busy with the arts program to want to hear them. Clara told him she had stopped telling him about the things that scared her, because he was so dependably competent that she had started to feel irrationally that her fears would seem small beside his solidity. They had both disappeared into an idea of each other that was outdated, and neither had said so, because neither had thought they were allowed to. At 1 in the morning, Clara said, I don't want to lose us to our own silence. Neither do I, Marcus said. Then we have to decide to stop being silent. Yes, he said, we do. They went to bed without resolution, which was the right thing, because the problem was not one that resolved in a single night. But they went to bed having said the true thing, and the air in the room was different from the air of the previous several hundred nights, and that was the beginning of something. Part 5. The morning. Clara woke at 7 to an empty bed and sounds from the kitchen. For a half-second the old fear tightened in her chest, the same fear that had been present since September, the fear that something was different in a way that was permanent and bad. Then she smelled coffee and heard the specific sound of the kitchen, the way it sounds when Marcus is making breakfast rather than just passing through it, and the fear settled into something more manageable. She found him at the stove with 2 eggs in a pan and a pot of coffee made, and a particular expression on his face, not the easy absent expression of a man moving through a comfortable routine, but the expression of someone who had been awake for a while thinking about something, and had arrived at something he intended to say. You didn't sleep, she said. 4 hours, maybe. He handed her a mug. I've been thinking. She sat at the table. Tell me. He turned from the stove. I've been thinking about what you asked last night, about why it felt like being seen, and I want to answer it better than I did. He leaned against the counter. The real answer isn't about Rebecca. The real answer is that I had stopped believing you wanted to see those parts of me, not because of anything you did, because of a story I told myself, a story that said, you're the steady one, the capable one, the one who makes the structure work. You don't get to be uncertain in front of the person who depends on the structure. He looked at her. I built a version of myself that had no room for fear, and then I was surprised when it felt lonely inside it. Clara wrapped both hands around her mug. The morning light was coming through the window at the angle it comes through in October in Seattle, low and sideways, and the colour of something ending and something else beginning. I built a version of myself too, she said. The version who handles things, who doesn't need more than what's already here. She looked at him. I stopped asking for things because I didn't want to seem ungrateful. We have a good life, Marcus. A genuinely good life. Simona's healthy. This house is beautiful. Our work matters. I felt like wanting more would be should. Vilket be a kind of ingratitude. Wanting to be known by your husband isn't ingratitude, he said. I know that now. He came to the table and sat across from her. Not at his usual end opposite, he sat in Simone's chair, which put him close to her, close enough that she could see the specific quality of his attention, the way it was directed at her, rather than at the general vicinity of her. She had not realized until now how long it had been since she had felt the direction of it. I want to tell you something, he said, about Simone. Clara blinked. What about her? Last month she came to me with a problem, not a homework problem, a real problem, something that was worrying her about a friendship at school. And she talked to me about it for almost an hour. She told me everything, all the layers of it, all the fears. He paused. And at the end she said, "You're good at listening, Dad. You asked the right question." And I sat with that for a week, feeling proud of myself. And then I realized. He looked at Clara. I am better at asking Simone the right questions than I am at asking you, my own child, and the reason is that with Simone I never started assuming I knew the answers. Clara felt something move through her chest that she couldn't fully name. We started assuming, she said. We started assuming he agreed. They sat in the October morning kitchen in the house they had built together and let that truth be as large as it needed to be. Then Marcus said, I want to take today off. She looked at him. Today? I'll call the office. Simone is at Petra's until noon. I want us to have a morning. Not a productive morning, not a morning where we handle things. Just a morning where we're two people who are trying to remember each other. He held her gaze. Will you stay home with me? She looked at him for a long moment, then she put down her mug. Yes, she said, I will. Part 6, the day. They walked to Woodland Park because the rain had stopped overnight, and the park in October after rain has a specific quality. The wet leaves, the cold air, the complete absence of the summer crowd, the sense of a city in the process of becoming quieter and more honest about itself. They walked for 20 minutes before either of them said anything significant. The small talk was comfortable, and Clara noticed that she didn't mind the small talk, which was different from the evenings in the living room, where the small talk had felt like a wall. Here it felt like a clearing. Something between them had opened the night before and the morning after, and the clearing was what was left. Marcus broke the significant silence first. Tell me something about your work that you haven't told me, he said. Not a project update, something you think or feel about it. She thought about it. I've been worried that the program is becoming institutional, she said. That we're too good at getting funding and not good enough at the actual thing. The surprise of it, the moment when something you made touches someone who didn't expect to be touched. She paused. I've been worried that we've built something so successful that success is now the point, and the art has become the method for achieving the success rather than the reason the success matters. Marcus was quiet for a moment. That sounds like something you've been carrying for a while. A year, maybe. I mentioned it once at a board meeting, and the response was numbers, attendance figures, grant totals. So I stopped mentioning it. You didn't stop mentioning it to the board, Marcus said. You stopped mentioning it to me. She turned to look at him. Why? He asked. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. Because you would have tried to solve it, she said. And then hearing herself, that's not fair. You would have listened. I would have listened, he confirmed. And probably then tried to solve it. He smiled slightly. But you could have told me not to solve it. You could have told me you just needed to say it. I could have, she said. I forgot that was an option. They walked. An older man passed them with a very small dog. A child ran between two adults who were telling her to slow down without any real conviction. The ordinary life of a public park, indifferent and generous. Tell me what you're afraid of, Clara said. Not about the project, about us. Marcus was quiet for a while. That last night was the conversation we should have had 3 years ago, he said finally. And that 3 years is a long time to have been this close to losing something. What would losing it have looked like? She asked. Slowly becoming two people who are good roommates, he said, who take care of the same child and live in the same house and are kind to each other and have nothing that's urgent between them. He looked at her. That was the trajectory. I can see it clearly now. If September hadn't happened, We might have arrived there so gradually that we wouldn't have known we'd arrived until we were already completely inside it. Clara thought about the word trajectory. Engineers thought in trajectories, in the structural logic of where things were headed. What changed the trajectory? She asked. You asking the question last night, he said, and September, and... He paused. I think you have been trying to change the trajectory for a long time. I think you've been reaching toward me in ways I wasn't paying enough attention to see. She thought about the evening she had suggested things a weekend away, a class they could take together, a dinner reservation at a restaurant they'd been meaning to try. He had always been agreeable, always willing, and somehow none of it had ever happened. Not because he had refused, but because they had both been comfortable enough with the familiar to let the unfamiliar slide. We kept choosing easy, she said. Yes, he said. We kept choosing easy, They walked to a bench at the edge of the park's rose garden, which in October was stripped down and architectural, the shapes of things, without the seasonal decoration. They sat and looked at the stripped-down shapes, and Clara thought about how there was something honest about a garden in winter. It showed you the structure. I need to tell you something about Isabel, she said. Marcus turned toward her. She's the one who made me say it out loud, not last night, weeks ago at lunch. She saw it on me whatever I was carrying, she asked, and I told her. She paused. I'm telling you because I don't want anything to be something I carry alone anymore. He was quiet for a moment. What did she say? She said you're a man who got lost, not a man who stopped loving me. And that those are different. Clara looked at the rose garden. She was right, and... I didn't stop, he said. I never stopped. I stopped making it visible. I stopped making you feel it. He looked at his hands. That's the thing I keep coming back to. I was here, I was present, I was doing all the things. But love isn't about doing the things, it's about making the person feel the doing. Yes, Clara said. That's exactly it. They sat in the October park for a long time, talking the way they had talked in the early years. Not productively, not efficiently, not toward any specific destination, but with the open-ended quality of two people who are interested in each other rather than managing each other. Clara learned things. That Marcus had been having doubts about his career direction for almost 2 years and had not said so because he had decided it was his problem to resolve privately. That he had been reading poetry for the past year quietly alone because he had found it useful for understanding things that his professional language didn't have words for. And he had not told her because he expected her to find it surprising, and he had not wanted to be surprising in ways he couldn't explain. That he had thought about suggesting couples counselling 3 times in the last year, and had not done so because he was afraid she would interpret the suggestion as an indication that things were worse than he felt they were. Marcus learned things too, that Clara had applied without telling him for a fellowship with a national arts organisation that would have required her to spend 3 months in residence in New York, and had withdrawn the application because she had decided she couldn't ask their family to reorganise around her ambition, and had never told him about the application or the withdrawal, and still sometimes thought about the New York that hadn't happened, that she had been having a recurring feeling for the last 18 months that she was on the edge of her own life, rather than inside it, observing rather than inhabiting, that she had started and abandoned 3 times a practice of writing things down in the morning not for any purpose, just to make her own thinking visible to herself, and had stopped each time because it had felt too much like an acknowledgement that something was missing. They walked back through the park in the early afternoon, through the neighbourhoods, between the park and their house, through the ordinary geography of their ordinary life, and the ordinary geography looked different than it had the previous evening, not changed, but seen differently, the way a room looks different when the light source changes. At the corner of their street, Marcus stopped. I need to tell you something, he said, and I need to tell you now before we go back inside the house. Clara stopped and turned toward him. Tell me. I need to apologise, not for September, I've already apologised for that, and you've received it, and I don't want to make it the permanent subject between us. I need to apologise for the 3 years before September. He met her eyes. I let us become comfortable instead of close. I let myself believe that stability was the same as intimacy. And I told myself that was enough because it was easier than admitting that something was missing, because admitting something was missing would have meant sitting in the discomfort of not knowing how to fix it. And he stopped. I am not good at not knowing how to fix things. Clara looked at him. A car passed. Somewhere nearby a door opened and closed. "I know," she said. "And I let you believe it was enough because I didn't want to be the person who said it wasn't, because saying it wasn't felt like ingratitude, like criticism, like disturbing something that was working." She paused. "We were both protecting the same silence." "Yes," he said. "We're going to have to learn how not to," she said. "I know. It's going to be uncomfortable. I know that too." She reached out and took his hand, not the automatic, habitual hand-holding of people who have held each other's hands for 14 years, but a deliberate, chosen gesture, the kind that means, "I see you, and I'm choosing this." He held her hand back with the same quality of intention. They walked home. Part 7. Simone. Their daughter came home at noon on Saturday, dropped off by Petra's father with a backpack full of overnight residue and the specific energy of a 12-year-old who has spent 16 hours with her best friend. She bounced into the kitchen, grabbed an apple, began telling a story about something that had happened at 10:30 the previous night that was clearly important to her and of limited intelligibility to anyone over 35. Clara and Marcus listened with complete attention. Simone mid-story stopped. "Why are you both smiling?" she asked, not accusatory, genuinely curious. "We're just happy to see you," Clara said. Simone considered this with the honest skepticism of a 12-year-old. "You look different," she said. "Both of you." "Different how?" Marcus asked. She thought about it. "Like when I come home from a really hard test, and I feel lighter because it's done." She took a bite of her apple. "Like something was hard, and now it's less hard." Clara looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Clara. "Something like that," Clara said. Simone accepted this with the adaptable pragmatism of a child who has learned that her parents are complicated people and that this is not necessarily a problem. She finished her story, which they received with the appropriate appreciation, and went upstairs to her room. They heard music start the specific playlist she used when she was in the kind of mood that needed to be externalized. Marcus made lunch. Clara sat at the kitchen table and watched him and let herself be present in the watching, rather than using the time to think about the next thing that needed to happen. He moved around the kitchen with the ease of someone who had been cooking in this kitchen for 11 years, who knew where every implement was and how the stove behaved and which of the cutting boards she preferred for vegetables. She had watched him cook 1,000 times. Today, she watched him as if it were interesting, which it was, which it had always been, which she had stopped noticing. He looked up and caught her watching. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. "I'm just looking." He smiled a specific smile, one she recognized from the early years, one she had not seen in some time. Then he went back to the stove. After lunch, Simone appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had changed into outdoor clothes and was holding her camera, a film camera that had been a gift from Clara's mother 2 years ago, and which Simone had developed a serious, quiet attachment to. "Can I go to the park to take pictures?" she asked. "Take your phone more," Marcus said. "Text when you get there." "I always do," she said and left. They sat at the kitchen table in the silence that follows a child leaving the house, which is a specific kind of silence full rather than empty the presence of her, still in the air, even in her absence. "She knows something happened," Clara said. "Kids always do," Marcus said. "She doesn't know what, and she doesn't need to, but she knows something shifted." "Is that all right?" He thought about it. "I think it's good, actually. I think she'll feel the difference in the house, and it'll be a good difference. Children feel the quality of the space between their parents. When the space is honest, it's better." He paused. Even when the honesty is hard. Clara thought about that. About Simone with her camera in the park, looking for the things worth documenting. Simone had explained once with the earnestness of a person who takes their art seriously, even at 12, that photography for her was about finding the moments that were real rather than the moments that were supposed to be real. She had said, "I don't want to photograph what people look like when they know I'm looking. I want to photograph what they look like when they're just being." Clara had thought about that for weeks after Simone said it, had thought about it again this morning. What do people look like when they're just being? What do they look like when no one is performing stability or competence or having it together? What is the actual face of the person rather than the face they offer to the room? She thought she was beginning to remember Marcus's actual face, and she thought he was beginning to remember hers. Part 8. The months. The months that followed were not a transformation. Clara wanted to be honest about that, because stories about marriages in crisis tend in their third acts to offer a resolution that is cleaner than the actual experience of repairing something damaged. The actual experience is slower and less linear, and contains more reversals than any good story strictly requires. There were weeks that were genuinely better. They started having what Marcus called without irony, which was one of the things Clara loved about him. The actual conversation, meaning the conversation underneath the conversation, the one about what they were feeling rather than what was happening. Not every evening, and not by appointment, but with the regularity of people who had agreed that the thing mattered and were making room for it. They went to dinner twice, just the two of them, to restaurants they had never been to before, chosen specifically because the unfamiliar environment made it harder to slide into the familiar patterns. Marcus told her about the poetry. She asked him to read some of it to her, which he did. Sitting at the kitchen table on a Tuesday night, his voice very quiet, and she sat across from him and understood that this was one of the real parts of him that had been living in privacy, and she was grateful to be let into the room with it. She told him about the New York Fellowship, not as a complaint or a grievance, as information, as something she had carried that deserved to be shared. He listened for a long time without interrupting. Then he said, "If it comes around again, apply. We'll figure out the logistics." She had not expected that, and the unexpectedness of it made her understand something about the version of Marcus she had been living beside the version she had constructed, from assumption rather than actual knowledge. The actual Marcus was more flexible than the version she had built. The actual Marcus was capable of more than the version she had assigned him. There were also weeks that were harder. Old habits are not retired by a single honest conversation, even a very good one. There were evenings when they slid back into the surface level without noticing, and then one of them would notice and have to decide whether to name it or let it go, and naming it always felt risky, even though they had agreed naming it was the point. The fight in November was a real one. It began as the worst fights do over something that appeared to have nothing to do with what it was actually about. Marcus had made plans for a weekend away with two friends from his graduate program, a hiking trip in the Olympics, something they did every other year, something Clara had always known about and supported. He had confirmed the dates and booked the ferry and mentioned it to Clara on a Tuesday evening in the way you mention something you believe is already understood. Clara had received this information with a silence that went on a beat too long. "You already confirmed it," she said. "I thought you knew about the trip," he said. "I knew about the trip in general. I didn't know you'd confirmed it for those specific dates. The dates have always been the same. First weekend in November." "Marcus, that's the weekend of Simone's school play." He stopped. The silence in the kitchen changed quality. "She has the lead," Clara said. "We've talked about this multiple times. She's been rehearsing for 8 weeks. He put down the dish he was holding. "I forgot," he said. And then, because honesty was the agreement they had made, or I didn't listen carefully enough when it was mentioned, I'm not sure which. "Which of those is better?" Clara said. The argument went from there, not dramatic, not raised voices, but real, the kind of argument where the specific content is almost beside the point, where what is actually happening is the surfacing of things that have been sitting just below the surface, waiting for an opening. Clara said things about feeling like a logistical coordinator rather than a partner. Marcus said things about the asymmetry of who was responsible for tracking the family schedule, and who assumed someone else was handling it. They were both in their different ways, right? They were also both in their different ways expressing things they had not said before the October conversation had opened the room for saying them. Simone, who was doing homework at the dining table with her headphones on, became aware at some point that the conversation in the kitchen had shifted in quality. She came to the doorway without either of her parents noticing and stood there for a moment watching them with the alert, careful attention of a child who has learned to read the emotional weather of her household. Then she went back to her homework without being seen. Marcus cancelled the hiking trip. His friends were understanding it was not the first time a life obligation had intervened in the annual trip, and they rescheduled without significant drama. He told Clara he'd cancelled it that evening after the argument had settled into the particular silence that follows an argument that has said true things regardless of the cost of saying them. "You didn't have to cancel," Clara said. "Yes, I did," he said. "Simone has the lead. It's been 8 weeks of rehearsals and she wants us there." He paused. "I want to be there. I should want to be there without needing to be reminded. You don't have to be perfect," Clara said. "I know, but I'm trying to be present. Those aren't the same thing." They looked at each other across the kitchen. Something had shifted again. Not the large shift of the October conversation, but one of the smaller shifts that, taken together over months, accumulate into a different way of being with each other. "We're going to do this again," Clara said. "Forget something, misunderstand something, hurt each other over something that seems small and is actually large." "Probably," Marcus said. "The agreement isn't that we stop doing it," she said. "The agreement is that when we do it, we say so." "Yes," he said, "that's the agreement." Simone's school play was on a Friday evening in November. She played the leader girl, navigating a complicated friendship that required her to be by turns funny, heartbreaking, and quietly brave. Both Clara and Marcus sat in the third row and watched their daughter inhabit a character with the complete, unself-conscious presence of someone who was not performing for an audience, but simply being what the moment required. At the curtain call, Simone looked out into the house and found them immediately, as she always had, with the specific radar of a child who knows where her parents are in any room. She smiled. Not the performance smile of a lead actress at a curtain call, but Simone's actual smile, the one that was only for them. Marcus took Clara's hand in the dark of the theatre. He held it through the rest of the curtain calls, through the long exit from the auditorium, all the way out into the November night. There was also the question of Rebecca, which did not disappear simply because they had stopped talking about it. It was in the house, present and quiet, and occasionally Clara would wake at 3 in the morning and feel it there. Not with fury, more with a residual uncertainty, a question she had not fully resolved about what it meant that the almost had been necessary for September to happen, and whether the life she had been living before September was the life she wanted to live going forward. She had come over months to an answer that was not simple, but was honest. She was glad September had happened. Not the almost which she did not need, and which had cost her something she was still in the process of naming, but the disclosure, the conversation, the question that had followed. Those she was glad of. They had forced an opening that she was not certain they would have found otherwise. In December they started seeing a therapist together. Not in crisis mode by that point, the acute crisis had passed, but with the understanding that some of what they needed to learn how to do was genuinely difficult and would benefit from professional structure. The therapist's name was Dr. Anita Obi, a woman in her early 60s with an office in Fremont that smelled of cedar and old books. She did not try to solve them. She asked questions and sat inside the space the questions created, and occasionally said things that made both Marcus and Clara look at each other with the expression of people who have just heard something true they had not previously found words for. Simone noticed the improvement in the way that children notice things, not directly, not articulately, but visibly. She began hanging around the kitchen more in the evenings, participating in conversations rather than retreating to her room as soon as dinner was over. One Saturday morning she brought her camera downstairs and photographed her parents making breakfast. Neither of them had known she was doing it until the prince came back from the lab 3 weeks later. Marcus and Clara, standing in their kitchen, not posing, not performing, just being. What they looked like when no one was looking. Clara kept the photograph on her desk at work. Part 9, Isabel Revisited. 7 months after the October dinner, Clara met Isabel for lunch again. Same restaurant on Capitol Hill, same table near the window, the same view of the street going about its indifferent business. Isabel looked at her for a moment after they ordered. "You look different," she said. "Different how?" "Like you're more completely in the room than you were," Isabel said. "Like you're not listening to something else at the same time." Clara thought about that. "We're better," she said. "Not fixed. Better. Tell me." She told her. Not everything, some of it belonged only to her and Marcus, the specific private territory of a marriage being rebuilt which has a privacy requirement even for close friends. But the shape of it, the conversation in October, the morning after the day in Woodland Park, the questions that had led to other questions, the therapist in Fremont, the fight in November that had cleared something the photograph Simone had taken without them knowing. Isabel listened. When Clara finished, Isabel was quiet for a moment. "I want to ask you something," Isabel said, "and you can tell me it's not my business. When has that stopped you?" Isabel smiled. "What would you say to the version of yourself from 2 years ago? The one who was carrying it, but not saying it?" Clara thought about it seriously. 2 years ago, the loneliness she had not named, the evenings on opposite ends of the couch, the assumption that wanting more was ingratitude. "I would say the silence isn't protecting anything," she said finally. "You think the silence is keeping the peace, but the peace it's keeping is a peace that's slowly becoming the whole problem." Isabel nodded. And to Marcus from 2 years ago, I'd say the version of yourself you're protecting, the one who doesn't get to be uncertain, who doesn't get to be afraid in front of the people who depend on him, that version isn't serving you. It's making you unreachable. And unreachable is a form of lonely that you get to be inside the same house as the person you love. She paused. And it makes you vulnerable to someone who offers to see what you've hidden. They sat with that. Is it completely better? Isabel asked. No, Clara said honestly. It's honestly better. There's a difference. Completely better would mean the scar is gone. Honestly, better means the scar is there and we can see it, and we know what it is, and it doesn't stop us from being in the room together. She looked at her water glass. Some nights I wake up at 3 a.m. and I'm still in the same fear. And some mornings Marcus looks at me with that specific attention he has, and I think we almost lost this. And the almost is terrifying. She looked at Isabel. But the terrifying part is also the part that keeps us paying attention. We don't assume anymore. We ask. Is he? Isabel reached across the table and put her hand over Clara's. They stayed like that for a moment, 2 women at a table in Seattle in the spring, the city outside the window, going about its ordinary day, entirely indifferent to the specific repairs being made in the lives within it. I'm glad you said it to me that day, Isabel said. 7 months ago. You forced it, Clara said. You were ready, Isabel said. I just gave you the opening. Part 10, What Was Learned. 11 months after the October conversation, Clara and Marcus sat on their back porch on a September evening. Simone was inside doing homework with her headphones on. The garden was doing what Seattle gardens do in September, going to seed in a way that is simultaneously dishevelled and beautiful. The colours saturated by the end of summer and the light doing something extraordinary on its way to the shorter days. Marcus had a glass of wine. Clara had tea. Neither of them was looking at a phone. I've been thinking about something Anita said last week, Marcus said. What did she say? She said that the goal of couples work is not to return to the beginning, that you can't return to the beginning because both people are different from who they were at the beginning, and trying to return produces something false. She said the goal is to introduce yourself to who you've become and find out if you like each other still. Clara thought about that. Do you? She asked. Like me still? He looked at her. More than before, he said. Because I know more of you than before. You were always... He searched for the word. You were always more than the version I had of you. I just wasn't asking the right questions to find out. Tell me one thing, she said. One thing you know about me now that you didn't know this time last year. He thought about it. That you're braver than I gave you credit for. That you've been living with a level of internal complexity, questions, fears, ambitions, uncertainties that I never saw because you were careful not to show me, and that the being careful was itself a form of sacrifice, and the sacrifice was yours, and you never asked to be compensated for it. He held her gaze. He held her. I know that now. I'm trying to learn how to see it without being asked. She was quiet for a moment. Tell me one thing you know about yourself, now that you didn't know a year ago, she said. That I had built a version of myself that had no doors, he said. A version that was very solid and very dependable and entirely closed off, and I had been living in it so long I had forgotten it was a version and started to think it was just me. The actual things, he paused. The actual thing is messier, more uncertain, more afraid. He looked at the garden, also more real. Clara leaned against his shoulder. He shifted to accommodate her, the automatic generosity of a body that has been beside another body for 14 years and knows its shape. I want to tell you something, she said. Tell me. I've been thinking about applying for the fellowship again, the New York one. It's accepting applications in January. She felt his breathing change slightly, not in a negative way, in the way of someone taking in new information. I'd be gone for 3 months. You and Simone would have to reorganize. It would be inconvenient and expensive and logistically difficult. She paused. And it would be the right thing for my work, and I think I've spent enough years deciding that the right thing for my work is the thing that doesn't require other people to adjust. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, apply, he said. You're sure? Yes, he said. And I'm not saying it because I think I should say it, or because it's the generous thing. I'm saying it because your work matters, and your ambition matters, and 3 months is not forever, and Simone is 12, not 3. We'll be fine. He paused. And we're better at asking each other for help now than we used to be. We'll ask for help. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, felt the weight of 14 years and one very difficult year within those 14 years, and the specific lightness of being beside a person who has agreed at some cost to keep choosing. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me, he said. Just apply. They sat on the porch until the light was completely gone from the garden, until Simone's homework sounds had stopped and the house had gone quiet, until the September evening had become the September night, and neither of them reached for a phone or a book or any of the habitual props that people use to fill the silences they're afraid of. They just sat in the dark beside each other, in the house they had built, and let the silence be the kind that is full of something rather than empty of it. Some silences are the problem, some silences are the proof that you have solved it. They were inside the second kind, and the second kind, Clara had learned, required the same thing the first kind required: courage. The courage to speak into it when it needs breaking, the courage to stay inside it when it doesn't, the courage to know the difference, which is the work of a lifetime, which is also. She now understood what a lifetime together is for. Part 11, Epilogue. The fellowship application went in on the 15th of January. In March, Clara received a letter informing her that she had been selected. She was in the kitchen when she opened it, standing by the window, with the morning light coming in at the low winter angle. And she read the letter twice, and then stood very still for a moment, feeling the specific quality of a door opening that you had thought was permanently closed. She texted Marcus, "I got it." His response came back in 11 seconds. "I knew you would. Go." She texted Isabel, "I got the fellowship." Isabel's response, obviously, "When do you leave?" She went upstairs to Simone's room, where Simone was getting ready for school, and sat on the edge of the bed and told her daughter about the fellowship and the 3 months in New York and what it would mean for the spring. Simone listened with the full attention she brought to things that mattered. Then she said, "Will you send me photos every day?" Clara said. "Not the tourist ones," Simone said. "The real ones. The ones of what it actually looks like when you're just being there." Clara looked at her daughter, at this person who had materialized from the love between her and Marcus, and had become over 12 years someone who understood things about being present that took most adults decades to learn. "Yes," she said, "the real ones." Before she left for New York, there was one more thing she needed to do. She called Rebecca Shaw. She had been thinking about making this call for 4 months, and had not made it because she did not know what she wanted from it, and she had learned over the past year not to make calls she did not know the purpose of. But in February she had found the purpose, not confrontation, not closure, not the performance of forgiveness for someone who had not asked for it, just information. Just the piece of the story she did not have, which was Rebecca's version of what had happened in San Francisco. Rebecca answered on the third ring. Her voice was careful when Clara identified herself, careful in the specific way of someone who has been expecting a call for months, and is managing the relief and dread of its arrival simultaneously. "I'm not calling to be angry at you," Clara said. "I want you to know that first." "Okay," Rebecca said, her voice steadied slightly. "I want to ask you something," Clara said. "You asked Marcus what he was afraid of." "In San Francisco, he told me that. He said it was the moment something changed in the conversation." She paused. "I want to know why you asked it. What made you ask?" There was a silence on Rebecca's end, because he looked like someone who was carrying something heavy and had decided he wasn't allowed to put it down. She said finally. "I recognized it. I'd felt that way in my own marriage before it ended, the way you hold yourself when you've decided your job is to be the strong one and the strong one doesn't get to be tired." Clara sat with that for a moment. "And when you asked him—" "He looked surprised," Rebecca said, like the question was in a language he hadn't spoken in a while. A pause. "I'm sorry for the rest of it. The dinner, the direction it was going. I knew he was married and I let it go further than it should have gone." Her voice was honest and without self-pity. "I stopped it, but I shouldn't have needed to stop something that shouldn't have started." "He stopped it too," Clara said. "He did," Rebecca confirmed. "He got up and walked around the block and came back and finished his dinner and said good night, and that was the end of it. I want you to know that, in case he soft-pedaled it." "He didn't," Clara said. Another silence. "How are you?" Rebecca asked. The question was genuine rather than polite. "Better," Clara said. "Honestly better. We've been working at it." She paused. "Thank you for asking him the question. I know that sounds strange, but the question is what started everything. The thing you saw in him, the heaviness, the holding himself, I had stopped seeing it. I had stopped seeing a lot of things. His telling me about San Francisco forced me to look." She paused. "So, Thank you for the question, not for the rest of it. You're welcome for the question, Rebecca said quietly, and I'm sorry for the rest of it. Clara said goodbye and ended the call. She sat in her kitchen for a long time, after not feeling any of the things she had expected to feel, not triumph or relief, or the particular satisfaction of having done something difficult. Just a kind of completeness. The picture was now whole. All the parts of it were accounted for. She could carry it now without the weight of the missing piece. She left for New York on the 4th of April. Marcus drove her to the airport. They stood at the departure terminal in the specific quality of a goodbye that is temporary but significant, that involves both the sadness of absence and the understanding that the absence is chosen and therefore different from loss. I'll call you tonight, she said. I'll be awake, he said. She kissed him. He held on a moment longer than was strictly necessary for an airport goodbye, which was exactly the right amount of time. Then she walked through the doors with her carry-on and did not look back, not because she was moving away from something, but because she was moving towards something. And both things were true at the same time, and she had learned over the past year that the both things true is where the real life happens. She called him from the gate. They talked for 20 minutes about nothing important and everything that was. About Simone's science project, about the loose hinge on the back door that had come undone again, about a poem Marcus had read the previous week that he wanted to share with her when she had a quiet moment, about the garden which he was going to replant in her absence, and about what she wanted in it when she came back. What do you want? He asked. Surprise me, she said. He laughed, the laugh she had been hearing for 14 years and still in this moment found startling. I'll see what I can do, he said. She boarded her plane. She found her seat, settled herself, looked out of the window at the Seattle tarmac in the April rain. The plane moved, the city receded, the clouds came. Somewhere below in a house in Finney Ridge, a man she loved was probably making dinner for their daughter and thinking about what to plant in the garden and reading poetry alone in the kitchen. He would call her tonight. She would tell him about New York, about the fellowship, about what the first day of doing the thing she had almost not applied for felt like. He would listen and ask the right questions and then tell her about his day in the specific detail that she had learned over the past year to ask for and he had learned to offer. They were not the same as they had been. They were better and worse and more honest and more complicated and more fully themselves than they had been, and the being fully themselves in the presence of each other was the thing, the actual irreplaceable, not available anywhere else thing that she had almost stopped believing was possible and that she would not stop paying attention to again. The city disappeared into the clouds. Clara looked away from the window, opened the notebook she had started keeping in November, and began to write. The most dangerous silence in a marriage is not the one after a fight. It is the one that grows so slowly, so quietly, that neither person notices it has filled every room. She had lived in that silence, she had named it, she had opened the window. The air, it turned out, was still good, the room was still theirs, the love had not gone anywhere. It had only been waiting the way certain seeds wait for the right conditions to show itself. She wrote until the plane broke through the clouds into the white light above them, and below was all the ordinary, complicated, beautiful, difficult, chosen life she was still in the middle of living. The question she had asked on an October evening in the rain had not broken anything. It had, in the way that the bravest questions always do, broken something open. And what was inside was everything she had been afraid to find, and everything she had needed to find, and everything it turned out that was still there. She closed the notebook, she looked at the white above the clouds and thought, this is what it feels like to have asked. Then she opened the notebook again and kept writing, because the story was not finished, and the story was not going to finish, and that the ongoing, unresolved, honest, imperfect continuation of it was the whole point. The end. Cast of characters: Clara Voss, Director of Seattle's Community Arts Program, 41. 14 years into a marriage she loved and was quietly losing the ability to feel. A woman who had confused not wanting to be ungrateful with not wanting to be known. Brave enough finally to ask the question that was not comfortable. Marcus Voss, structural engineer, 43. A man of genuine competence and genuine love who had built a version of himself with no room for uncertainty, and then been surprised to find it lonely inside. Brave enough to come home from San Francisco and say what had almost happened. Simone Voss, 12 years old, film photographer, the daughter who noticed the quality of the space between her parents, and was old enough to be glad when it changed and wise enough to photograph what it looked like when it did. Isabel Reyes, graphic designer, arts program advisor, Clara's close friend. The person who gave Clara the opening because she had been paying enough attention to see that Clara needed one. The best possible kind of friend. Rebecca Shaw, lead architect on Marcus's San Francisco project. Not a villain, a woman who asked Marcus what he was afraid of, which is a thing that his wife had stopped asking, which is the whole story in miniature. Dr. Anita Obi Couples, therapist, Fremont. Did not try to solve them, asked questions and sat inside the space the questions created. The right person for the work.